On China's box office market, I'm joined by Aynne Kokas, Assistant Professor of Media Studies at the University of Virginia and the award-winning author of Hollywood Made in China. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me today.
So as we saw, China saw a new record in its summer box office. Talk about some of the movies that are kind of helping boost these numbers.
So we see films like Dying to Survive, for example. We see The Meg. So these are kind of two interesting examples of Chinese films and co-produced films that are advancing the growth of the market.
Now, what are the movies that have succeeded or flopped? What does that tell us about the changing taste of the Chinese consumer?
So one thing that we're definitely seeing is increasingly sophisticated Chinese consumers who want films that speak to their direct life experiences. Now, the one major caveat is that there still is a very big appetite for big budget blockbuster films, like, for example, the film Rampage with The Rock, or the most recent Jurassic World film.
So is it by generation that we're seeing this different sort of success depending on the movie?
So I think that we do see younger consumers, those who were born post-1990, have a greater priority in seeing stories that speak to their lives. However, the films that are these kind of global, big-budget, blockbuster Hollywood films do kind of cut across a wide variety of demographics.
And what does this growth in China's movie market tell us, not just about where the market is heading, but where Chinese consumption is?
So we are seeing, with this growth of the Chinese film market this summer, we're seeing the growth of Chinese domestic consumption, which is really a significant trend. And we also saw that in the first quarter of 2018, the Chinese box office was larger than the US box office. Now, this is a strange phenomenon in the sense that there was the Chinese New Year period, and it's a relatively slow period for the US box office, but it will be interesting to see if this increase in consumption leads to the Chinese market becoming larger than the US market sooner rather than later.
Now, as we've seen, a lot more collaborations between China and Hollywood and other things like that. Are there any other trends that you're keeping an eye on that are really helping boost the market?
So something that I think is really interesting is the growth of Chinese domestically generated IP. So for example, one of the big films this summer was Monster Hunt 2. Now, on one hand, we can say, do we really need more sequels anywhere in the world? Maybe not. But on the other hand, it's really exciting to actually see Chinese domestically generated ideas and IP become sequels and start to take on big box office performance year after year after year.
And what about domestic filmmakers in China? How are they faring?
So we are seeing the growth of domestic stories. So for example, the film Dying to Survive. We also saw a film that was based on IP from a 1980s US film, Brewster's Millions, Mr. Billionaire. And that film actually had a very domestic, local Chinese spin on this idea of wealth and consumption.
And how do you see China's relationship with Hollywood developing, and especially also now that you add these movie streaming services into the mix as well?
Well, I mean, this is a very dynamic area. As we've discussed before, there's the trade war going on. So we have the renegotiation of the US-China film quota, which has not yet happened. And one may imagine that it's as a result of the kind of continuous trade tensions. We also see that Chinese domestic players are taking a lead in the digital distribution service. So iQIYI previously was a subsidiary of Baidu. Now it most recently had its IPO, so its initial public offering. So we are seeing the growth of Chinese domestic streaming platforms. And I think that we may see those platforms competing for other markets.
And are there any potential challenges you see in the growth of China's movie market?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we've seen is while there is a real appeal for domestic consumers, we still haven't seen Chinese films take a major role outside of China. Now, in some ways, that's not so much of an issue from the financial perspective because of the size of China's market. However, one can imagine that Chinese filmmakers are very eager to take their place on the global stage.
I'm sure. Thank you so much. Aynne Kokas there, Assistant Professor of Media Studies at the University of Virginia.